Joining us now to take a deeper look at this, Julia Manchester, political reporter for The Hill. Julia, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So let's start here with what we're seeing on the Hill in terms of how they're viewing everything going on between Israel and Iran. We mentioned that Congress maybe wants to vote on it. What's the feeling right now? What are you hearing from lawmakers?
Yeah, so there's certainly, I think, a feeling in some parts of Congress of bipartisanship. You had conservative Congressman Thomas Massey, along with progressive Congressman Ro Khanna, introduce that piece of legislation, get a number of co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle on that would essentially make the administration or the executive branch get the approval of Congress before intervening in Iran or other foreign conflicts. So that's what we're waiting on here in Washington. Of course, the House not in session today. But other than that, we're also seeing, I think, a deep divide within the Republican Party in general on this. You have the national security hawkish establishment Republicans that may be more, in favor, not in favor, but wouldn't have necessarily as much of a problem with intervention as with the American First Republicans or very isolationist Republicans. We've seen this spill out publicly, notably with conservative talk show host Tucker Carlson, President Trump and him trading barbs online. And in fact, there was a viral video that last night that posted with Tucker Carlson interviewing Texas Senator Ted Cruz and then really going at it over this issue of Iran. So there's deep divides within the Republican Party, but other parts of bipartisanship when it comes to the U.S.'s approach to Iran.
Well, and Julia, I feel like right now we're at the stalemate between the U.S. and Iran. You've got our leader, you got President Trump saying, I want to make a deal. I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want there to be a nuclear program. And then Iran's supreme leader in the last hour, Julia, came out and said, if the U.S. joins Israel in these strikes against the Islamic Republic, it will, quote, result in irreparable damage for them, for Israel, for us, I assume. You got a stalemate going on between two leaders. What is the next step for the U.S.? I mean, that's quite a threat.
It is a threat, but I think, Iran is certainly on the back foot here. The U.S. has, I think, the upper hand here, but we don't know what President Trump's going to do. That's the big question. And we've been seeing leaks reporting that suggests that he is leaning in towards potentially intervening. I don't think we'd see, that those leaks if President Trump wasn't considering it. So we'll have to see what happens next and what that looks like. Does it look like boots on the ground? Does it look like the U.S. Continues to help Israel with strikes? We just don't know.
Speaking of that viral clip that you mentioned there with Senator Cruz and Tucker Carlson, are you shocked at all at how quickly the administration has seemingly done an about-face? Because at first it seemed like they were urging Israel not to strike Iran, and now, as we heard in that Tucker Carlson clip, they're almost saying that they're in cahoots with Israel in these strikes against Iran, maybe Senator Cruz getting tripped up on his words.
I think actually this goes way far beyond that clip. I think this is an about face for President Trump's foreign policy in general. This is someone who has campaigned really for the last nearly 10 years on against U.S. intervention in the Middle East or in different parts of the world, who would rail against the U.S.'s involvement in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So I think this is in general an about face for President Trump's foreign policy outlook in general. Now, last week, of course, we were talking about how President Trump was urging Israel not to strike Iran, but that was because the U.S. at that point was still engaged, at some level in nuclear talks with Iran to get them to de-escalate their nuclear program. Clearly, that's out the window, so maybe the stakes have changed.
Julia, because you have your pulse on what's happening on the Hill in Washington, there's a couple other topics we want to get to while we have you this morning. The sad news over the weekend of the Minnesota senator and her husband being killed, and now really just this fear, the spread of fear about wanting more security for senators and congressmen and women there in Washington. Where is that going? What does that unrest, what must that feel like if you're in politics in Washington right now?
Well, I don't think this is anything new. We have seen, not only at the state level, but we have seen assassination attempts at the federal level just last year against President Trump on the campaign trail. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky was attacked. Congressman Steve Scalise was attacked a number of years ago at a congressional baseball game practice. Of course, the January 6th attack on the Capitol and the Vice President Pence, and lawmakers' lives were put in danger then. So I don't think this conversation is anything new. I think oftentimes it gets renewed. I actually think this is a global conversation too. Just last week, we saw a Colombian presidential candidate. There was an attempted assassination against him. So we see this all around the world, this uptick in political violence. We've certainly seen it over the past 10 years here in the US. I think there's always been that conversation about upping security, not only for, members of Congress, but also for state lawmakers. Remember, state lawmakers are not all, as high profile as your average U.S. congressman or congresswoman. So I think you're seeing this conversation in state capitals across the country.
Julia, do you get a genuine sense that politicians are committed, though, to maybe toning down the rhetoric a little bit to stop being so divisive, because that may promote people from wanting to make these assassination attempts? I know they all say the right things, but do you get a sense that anybody's genuine about actually saying, okay, I'm going to stop the name calling, I'm going to stop the divisiveness, and genuinely make an attempt to not stoke violence?
I think oftentimes we hear that in the aftermath of a lot of these attacks, but it, just goes back to the status quo, and you go back to this, sort of bickering from both sides of the aisle, and we see more of the name calling. It was notable that shortly after those attacks, Utah Senator Mike Lee posted what was seen as a very offensive joke on Twitter about Minnesota and about Governor Tim Walz. And it actually resulted in Minnesota Senator Tina Smith on Capitol Hill confronting Mike Lee about this. And then, later on, we saw other Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar have a conversation with Mike Lee. He took down those tweets. So, I think sometimes you see maybe progress. I don't know if you want to call that progress in him taking down his tweets, but we see maybe a detente in many ways after some of these incidents. But it normally, I think, goes back to the status quo.
Never a dull day in politics, whether it's here or abroad. Julia Manchester, Capitol reporter with The Hill. Julia, always a pleasure. Thanks for being on this morning.
Thank you.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.